Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Hitsugaya Toshiro remembered his life as Naruto? Part 3. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so without wasting any time, let's get into the video. The day had started like any other. Matsumoto came into the office hungover. Hitsugaya berated her for her lack of attention. Matsumoto tried to create some sort of excuse to take a load off. Hitsugaya circumvented that and threatened her sake stashes if she didn't get at least some of her damn paperwork done. Matsumoto got a paltry amount of paperwork done before she and Hitsugaya had to go oversee their squad's scheduled morning training hour. Hitsugaya received reports from station patrols in the living world. So, it was pretty average start. A nice return to the monotony of their normal unimpeded lives after the horrors of all the battles and wars they'd only just fought, even with the fact that cleanup and reconstruction of Sarate was still well underway. Hitsugaya steeped some tea, filed more reports, and Matsumoto started dozing off. "Boy," Hitsugaya snapped, startling Matsumoto out of her almost successful nap. "Enough lazing about, Matsumoto." She flung herself upright with a yelp, hands moving to her chest. "Oh, Taichu, I hate it when you do that." They almost popped out again. Hitsugaya pinched his brow. "Really," he grumbled, "after everything that's happened you'd think you would." He trailed off into low mutterings that, were Matsumoto to listen properly, would have derogative remarks about her work ethic or lack thereof, as he'd put it. She rolled her eyes. "Really, Taichu," she said with a yawn, "you need to relax a little. It's been 5 years and nothing's come up since. Have you even gone to the bathhouse to get a nice soak-in massage? After last time?" he asked with a squint. "I would need to possess a death wish for my reputation to reenact the absolute humiliation of our last visit that, need I remind you, you dragged me into." "Aw, Taichu, it was an honest mistake on their part, I'm sure." Hitsugaya grumbled as he stood, rounding the desk to grab a stack of completed paperwork. "Since you're so intent on slacking off," he started, "then you can take this stack of completed paperwork to the first." He froze in place. "Taichu?" Matsumoto asked, immediately getting the sudden feeling that something was wrong as she looked up sharply. Hitsugaya could only stand there, his eyes wide and expression seeming almost confused. He let out a soft breath and then an ash-like substance began to rapidly climb up his feet to his encase the rest of his body. Matsumoto lurched to her feet. "Taichu." His reiatsu fluctuated abruptly, first spiking then falling almost dangerously. His eyes grew dim as an unrecognizable energy filled the air. Matsumoto was stuck in place, strangely taken by the bizarreness of its existence. It felt almost like reiatsu, but different, out of place, like it didn't belong there. It was strangely alive. As the rest of his body was encased, he dropped the paperwork and in an blink the ash dispersed. Hitsugaya was gone. In the aftermath, Matsumoto couldn't move. She stood still, staring at where her captain had stood, perfectly fine, only moments before. The disappearance was so sudden, so bizarre, so inexplicable that all she could do was stare. Then instinct kicked in. If this was some sort of pathogen, and if she got caught in it, then she was certain that things would go downhill from there. This information needed to be reported immediately. So she did the only thing she could think of in that situation, unsure of what the disappearance meant. She ran to the first division. In short time, an emergency captain's meeting was called. Considering how long it had been since an emergency meeting was called, the captains who filtered in were all on edge. "Strange," Rose commented, quietly scanning the line of gathered captains. "How after a relative period of radio silence, we've been called to an unscheduled meeting with such urgency." "Indeed," Lisa replied, her eyes narrowing as she looked to the post next to her. Hitsugaya was normally one of the more punctual captains from what she had discovered since taking a post in the Gate 13 once more. Furthermore, she was certain that she couldn't sense his reiatsu, and that was likely another issue that had the other captains on edge. "We wouldn't be called if it wasn't something worth talking about face to face, so we'll find out soon enough," Kensei muttered, folding his arms. Among the last to arrive were Zaraki, who arrived second to last simply for his usual misdirection, and Mayuri, who did things as he pleased. "Oh?" Mayuri said as he walked in, tapping his chin. "Hitsugaya is late, is he? That's quite curious of him. But, I do have to ask." He stepped into his place, appraising the empty spot with intense scrutiny. What could possibly have happened to warrant an emergency meeting like this? Iraku lowered his head. "Hitsugaya, actually, is exactly whom we're all here to discuss." He looked to Matsumoto, who stepped away from the wall and knelt at the end of the line. "Only just 10 minutes ago," Matsumoto said, her voice shaky, "Taichu disappeared." "Disappeared?" Byakuya asked, slowly, opening his eyes to look to her. The other captains were all silent regarding the vice captain before Sufing took one step forward. "Have we arranged a search yet? Tracked his reiatsu?" Matsumoto lowered her head. "He didn't desert his post. He vanished right before my eyes, in the office. Into nothing. This clearly caught Mayuri's interest as he grinned almost from ear to ear. Vanished into nothing, you say? How fascinating. Aisane moved a hand to her mouth. Fascinating. That's disturbing. Shinji's lips thinned as he looked over to Matsumoto, who had by then stood from where she was kneeling with a harrowed expression on her face. How did he disappear? Matsumoto clasped her hands together tightly. One moment, we were just talking, and then he was almost engulfed in this strange ash. And I could sense this feeling in the air, an energy I've never felt before. Mayuri steeped his fingers together as his grin persisted and he leaned forward. This looks like a situation wherein my expertise is necessary. Kairaku's lips twitched in a tired grin. You'll be glad to hear, then, that you'll be tasked with investigating the circumstances of his disappearance. The head captain rose his head. And I've called in Urahara Kisuke to assist you. Mayuri's delighted fascination quickly bled into displeasure. Oh, now why did you have to do that? He complained. I could have handled this well on my own without that unpleasant man butting into my work. The disappearance of a captain, Iba said firmly, is not something that can be spared any expense. Iba Taichu is correct, Lisa said coolly. Matsumoto looked to Kairaku who gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry. We'll find him. Upon being granted permission to do a small-scale investigation in the human realm, Matsumoto's first stop was Karakura town as she sent the rest of her assigned patrol to spread out in Japan. It was late at night when she arrived to the town and she took to the rooftops, struggling to sense any shred of Hitsugaya's Ryatsu. Still, she was coming up empty-handed and it left a hollow feeling in her stomach. Boy. Renjiku. What are you doing all the way out here? Matsumoto stopped in her one-track search, noticing the other Shinigami that stood in the distance on another roof. Ichigo looked quite perplexed to see her there and she went over, her expression still fraught with worry. Have you seen Taichu? She asked. She saw the continued confusion on his face at the question and her heart sank. I didn't think you had, but I thought I should ask. Toshiro's missing? Ichigo asked, staring in confusion. Matsumoto nodded. Urahara and Kuritsuchi Taichu are both investigating the nature of his disappearance, she said, rubbing her arm. I've been told not to go into the office until they can discern if the disappearance had a pathogenic origin or if something else happened. Ichigo frowned. Shit, he hissed, rubbing his neck. I'll be sure to keep an eye out for anything that could point us in the right direction. He looked up at Matsumoto and she saw earnest concern there. It was comforting, at least, to know that Ichigo cared. If you find any sign of him, let me know and I'll drop everything to help. Matsumoto smiled sadly. Thank you Ichigo. I'm going to continue to look for him. Ichigo looked over the cityscape and back to Matsumoto. Want some company on your search? Company sounded nice. And as it turned out, company was just what she needed, even if the search was fruitless. 1 week passed by. 7 long, stressful, agonizing days with no sign of Hitsugaya's whereabouts. Time seemed to stretch on even more than the past 5 years had done, and Matsumoto worked tirelessly to help the search effort and keep her own division calm. Many of the division members were worried about the possibility of Hitsugaya having deserted his post again, much like he had once before when he had gone after Kusaka. But this was different and deep down they knew that it was different. Hitsugaya's disappearance was an enigma. The whole of Sarate was on high alert. And then another emergency meeting was called. The fact that the attendance of both captains and vice captains was required was enough to stir the rumor mill and raise unease among the attendees of the meeting. Rukia spared a look to both Renji and Matsumoto, feeling a twist of sympathy for Matsumoto who, like herself now, stood alone with no captain to back. The most recent patrol on search for Hitsugaya Taichu returned from the living world, Kira said quietly, sparing his captain a brief glance as he addressed Matsumoto and Hinamori. Nothing was found. Hinamori twiddled her fingers together nervously, her expression clearly grieved and worried. This isn't like him at all. What if? Don't you go worrying yourself, Hinamori, Shinji said, waving a hand dismissively. We've probably got news from Kisuke. TCH, Mayuri snipped, looking quite disgruntled as both he and Urahara entered the hall. Discounting me, are you? How ungrateful. There's no need to put up such a fuss, Kuritsuchi, Urahara said with a lazy smile, fluttering his fan as the two of them came to a stop at the end of the line, standing before the congregation. Kairaku's expression was oddly serious, something that dampened the mood. But, he snapped his fan shut. We do indeed come with some interesting results to our investigation. Yes, Mayuri cut in, looking behind him. Namuri Hachigo. Yes, Mayuri-sama. Namuri entered the room proper, looking quite out of place with her small stature. Mayuri sighed, rubbing at his temple. Bring in the projection. And do keep your voice down. My apologies, Mayuri-sama. She placed down a small cube onto the ground and the cube opened up, revealing a circular holographic projector which displayed a dim node. And? Zaraki asked, raising a brow with a rather unimpressed glare. What's this fancy light show and what's it merit all of us getting down here? Patience, you brute, Mayuri snapped. It's a map. Urahara said, his tone oddly chipper for the tenseness of the room. It's the culmination of what we've been working on. This will likely go over your heads, but we primarily govern the balance and passage of souls in the living world, Mayuri began, waving a hand at the map. That does not mean that we exist in an isolated instance. Our dimension is not singular. The fundamental principle of gravity, which establishes our perception of time and space, is absolute not just in our dimension, but in others that run parallel to the living world, and we do have the requisite technology to access them through a Sinkamen were they to be properly calibrated. Urahara smiled thinly. That is to say that we can travel to other worlds. Or, rather, different instances of the world we know that have divergent paths than this one. We began to experiment with this theory after tracing the origin of the energy residues that remain in Hitsugaya's office and, with meticulous work, sent forward a probe to investigate the energy signature of that dimension. Mayuri gestured to the blip on the map. And we found traces of energy which suggest to us that Hitsugaya is indeed currently in a dimension separate from the one we govern. Matsumoto sagged in relief. It was some news as to Hitsugaya's location, and she would take it. Tensei's lip curled. So the question is, how did he get there? Oh, but that's not the question, Mayuri said, skiing under his breath as he shook his head. Don't be so simple-minded. The real question is, how did Hitsugaya get here? Pardon? Nanao asked from where she stood, her expression taking on a rather disturbed look. His Riatsu signature, Urahara continued, has changed. It is larger than Kuritsuchi's prior readings. In fact, it is comparatively astronomical and has a partial match to the quality of the predominant energy readings in that dimension, which is why pinpointing an accurate location has been so difficult. Such a change could only imply that Hitsugaya was never from the living world we oversee to begin with, Mayuri hummed, tapping his long nail against his arm. There was a brief lapse of silence as everyone present contemplated the meaning of that information. How could he have gained that much power in such a short duration of time? Byakuya asked, voice low as he scrutinized a pair of scientists. Oh, the power isn't him, Mayuri said dismissively. Not completely. It may be tied to his Riatsu reading, but it does not match his Riatsu. There's something tied to him that is surfaced in this dimension, and I do intend to find out what it is. Still, the growth of both the new reading and his own Riatsu signature are growing at what could be an unprecedented rate. Mayuri squinted at the blip, his expression growing more contemplative. The dimension where his most recent signature has been locked onto has also shown some strange fluctuations. Fluctuations? Aisane asked, her brow creased with her nervousness. Time dilation is the easiest way to explain it, Urahara said, though not time dilation in a traditional sense. It appears as if the dilation may be a consequence of the spatiotemporal displacement of a large quantity of energy, disbalancing the dimension itself. Though, that's just a theory. Iba frowned. Do you believe Hitsugaya is involved in the phenomenon? Believe? Do I believe? How preposterous. Mayuri laughed. I believe that if we establish contact with him, he will give us exactly the information we need to prove that he was the cause of the time dilation in this other world. Matsumoto opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off by a pinging sound. The blip on the map began to pulse as the mark's location fluctuated. Mayuri and Urahara both looked sharply to the display as it seemed to zoom in, and a rough location began to etch itself in. Oh, fascinating, Mayuri said, looking absolutely delighted. Hitsugaya's Riatsu has spiked enough for the probe to create a rough estimation of his current location. Aosufeng asked, blinking at the device. Ah, it's akin to a type of resonance imaging, Urahara explained, his Riatsu spike is substantial, to say the least. It's enough at the moment to rebound to our probe. And the readings, Kuritsuchi gushed, moving closer, oh this is phenomenal. I'll have fresh beepisable data for months, at least. Renji's lip twitched. So what does that mean for us? It means, Urahara drawled, looking from Renji to Kairaku, we can acquire enough data to pinpoint his location in a very short time. Kairaku closed his eye and then nodded, before fixing his now resolute gaze on Matsumoto who looked back in anticipation. Matsumoto. Hitsugaya is your captain and you're the last one who saw him, so this is your mission. Locate Hitsugaya and establish a point of contact with us. Choose your team and move out. Matsumoto nodded, her expression growing serious. Yes sir. Hitsugaya was alive, and she was going to find him and bring him home, even if it killed her. Hollow. Sakura felt the foul, malignant energy in the air before she ever saw what was causing it. The pressure seemed to be increasing by the second, and Hitsugaya cursed, looking down at himself. Pajamas. Really? Why did they even bother changing him? Why didn't he take the chance to change into his Shakusho? For the first time he missed having a gigai that he could just leave as the situation called for it and be in proper Shinigami attire. Pajamas were no real outfit to fight in, but he had little choice or little time to react. Hitsugaya moved quickly, swinging Orochimaru up from where it had been laid on the dresser and slipped the strap on over his shoulder. He threw open the window and jumped out, ignoring Sakura shouting after to wait up. With quick movements he arrived on the rooftop only to find, to his dismay, that the rest of his old friends were there as well, looking up to the horrific sight above them. But Tenten stammered out, her eyes wide, "What are those?" Hitsugaya finally looked up as well, and his eyes widened as well. The number of incoming hollow was easily among the highest in sheer volume he'd ever encountered in his tenure as a captain. Not that cutting them down would be hard, but cutting them down and preventing them from getting to the village that was rapidly going into a panicked frenzy below would be an annoyance. "Damn it," he snarled, drawing his Zanpakuto. He looked to the group behind him. "You don't know how to fight hollows. This is what I've trained for. Go down into the village, tell every shinobi you see to stay out of my way, and evacuate the civilians. You're not going to fight all those things by yourself." Ino gasped out, incredulous. Hitsugaya bared his teeth. "I fought pain on my own and I won. Just do it." And with that, he leapt into the air, using Shunpo to rapidly close the gap. "You died." Sakura shouted after him. Hitsugaya elected to ignore the retort. They were here because of him, they had to be. If everyone in this village could see hollow, and there had never been a hollow attack in his life, then it was exactly as he feared. His presence here had only endangered everyone, despite his attempt to keep a low profile while trying to go back. And so if they were here for him, then he'd give them exactly what they wanted. "So nice ace," he growled, Orochimaru. Now that he and Orochimaru were one again, and now that he was no longer concerned about the effect his power would have on this world, his power was in full effect. The sky above grew dark as clouds gathered as far as the eye could see, and thunder split harshly through the sky, illuminating the darkness. The pressure of his unrestrained Ryatsu filled the air around him, frigid and biting. Around his skin glowed a wide aura that gave him an almost ethereal look. Snow began to fall almost mercilessly, and the village looked on in awe at the sheer power. This Shikamaru breathed, and Niji and Hinata both watched on, Byakugan active. "This is his doing," Niji said. The amount of energy flowing through him into that blade, Hinata breathed. "I've never seen anything like this before." Hitsugaya swung his blade into the air, ice crackling down the length of the steel, and the dragon soared forth. It let out an ethereal shriek as it split apart into 5 heads that scored into the oncoming horde. The hollows froze and shattered into an icy mist, and Hitsugaya descended into the fray as the dragons followed his will. He moved with practiced speed and finesse, gouging into masks of any hollow that proved foolish enough to approach him, freezing them with a single stroke of his Zanpakuto. Finally, he could feel Orochimaru's spirit humming alongside him as they fought in perfect synergy, effortlessly dispatching of the threat. The feeling that surged through him was overwhelming, and he felt a strange elation and freedom in being able to cut loose, even if it would be a woefully short fight. He slid the blade forward, blocking a strike from a snake hollow, before overpowering its struggle against him and slicing its head clean off. But it seemed that the hollow were getting the picture, too. Some began to split off from the group, and Hitsugaya growled, sending off a few more ice dragons as he split off to cut the advance off. "I won't let you." He snapped, landing on the shoulders of a gorilla hollow and driving his blade through its head. He caught movement in his periphery and swore as he saw Shikaku, Inoichi and Choza attempting to engage a hollow that had landed on the roof. They were unheavily enough to crack the concrete beneath it. He saw Shikaku immobilize it and Choza punch it in the mask. Even with their combination attack, the hollow quickly snapped free of the shadow control, its mask barely even scuffed by the punch. A second hollow landed by them, reaching for Inoichi, and even though Inoichi attempted the mind-body disturbance jutsu, the hollow showed no reaction to it, grabbing the Yamanaka clan head and squeezing him tightly. "Don't interfere." Hitsugaya shouted as he dropped down, landing with an equally powerful impact that sprayed ice behind him as he slashed through the hollow's arm like butter. Inoichi dropped down with a wheeze, and Choza and Shikaku both looked to him. "Naruto?" Shikaku asked after a moment. "Used to be," Hitsugaya snapped, slicing through the second hollow. "Fall back and evacuate. I told your children to tell you, do you not listen?" "You're at a disadvantage," Choza argued, and Hitsugaya swung his blade out, sending yet another barrage of ice to slash an incoming bat hollow in half. He turned and glared at the three. "No, I'm not," Hitsugaya hissed. "This battle is the purpose of my afterlife. The living cannot purify hollow like Shinigami can, and you don't know how to effectively fight them. Listen to me for once in your lives. I can't afford to worry about babysitting you." As the three looked to each other, they realized that Hitsugaya was right. Shikaku inclined his head. "You be careful." "I don't need to be careful," Hitsugaya said in a scoff, "not against these hollow." And with that, he took to the air once again, seeing that, in his attempt to ward off the clan heads that were engaging in battle, he'd let more hollows slip by. Considering that he had no backup, getting to all of these damn hollow without encroaching on physical exertion was. Hold on. He had chakra again. The hinge wouldn't have worked otherwise. The paper wouldn't have torn otherwise. He wondered, then, just how much he had. Moving his hands up in the appropriate seal as best he could while still holding a sword, Hitsugaya focused on the feeling of the chakra that was hiding within him. He let out a growl as it slowly built up before encasing him in a dome of blue, whipping around him like a gale. Oh yes, he could work with this. Hitsugaya Bunshin no Jutsu. And just like that, the village knew just who Hitsugaya was. 100 clones stood, easy. Hitsugaya took a breath, feeling a slight strain from spreading his power out so much for the first time in a long time. Still, it was manageable eno, and he wondered exactly how he'd managed to go without. The clone spread out, and Hitsugaya moved forward, steeled by a surge of determination to see that the village below wasn't destroyed ever again. Following the beginning of Hitsugaya's counter-move against the hollow invasion, Shikamaru snapped into action. He turned to the rest of his friends, his gaze stern. Alright. You heard him, we've got work to do. Don't engage, just evacuate everyone we can. Are you serious? Ino asked incredulously, looking at Shikamaru. You're going to just do what he said? And let him fight all those things, alone? He seems to have it under control, Shino said, looking up at the sky. The rain of ice mist that was falling below with each fallen hollow spoke the truth of exactly how skilled Hitsugaya really was. Alright, Sakura said, her expression set with determination. Ino. Let's go and see if anyone's been injured. We're some of the best damn area ninja in this village, and we might as well make that clear. Yeah. Ino said, stiffening up her shoulders before following after Sakura. Hinata and Niji looked to each other and then looked to the group. We'll keep watch over evacuating civilians, Niji began, and Hinata was glad that she and Niji both had the same idea. And we'll divert people as needed, Hinata ended. Oh, Shikamaru said, and the two went off, quickly diving into the chaos of panicking civilians and helping divert people effectively to escape the encroaching hollows. Lee, Tenten, Shino, Sai and Kiba quickly went after them to help with the effort, and Choji looked to Shikamaru. What are you going to do? Shikamaru leveled a firm gaze to Choji. Everything I can to make sure the future of Konoha is protected. And Choji nodded. So will I. So the two descended into the madness below with a mission, spotting stragglers and helping them to get moving. The people were mostly frantic, though some recognized the power that Hitsugaya commanded and were hopeful of Naruto's return. Some even seemed outright close to reverence with how they kept stopping amidst a frenzy to watch the battle being waged above. Shikamaru had to admit that he did spare more than a few glances above, watching the almost effortless way that Hitsugaya moved and the way that the ice followed every move and heeded his every command. Honestly, he had had his reservations about obeying Hitsugaya's demand to be left to fight alone, considering the end that he had originally faced, but it was clear that his battle prowess had only sharpened in death. He heard a scream. A woman. The sound snapped him from his reverie, and he looked around before he spotted a smashed-in building. Shikamaru cursed and moved forward, hoping to whatever higher power there was that he'd get there before anything happened. Choji was hot on his tail. The young woman was holding a crying child and cowering as a giant six-armed beast grabbed some debris and chucked it away, working its way into the ruined building while reaching out to grab her. Shikamaru immediately flipped through the seals to activate his shadow imitation jutsu, thankful that he grabbed it just before it managed to grab her. Immediately, he realized why Hitsugaya told them not to fight the hollows. He was straining just to hold it in place for long enough, and its brute strength was making the act of holding it still unsustainable. Run. Shikamaru yelled. Choji, get them out and go. Choji nodded and, with a partial expansion jutsu, he reached an enlarged hand to grab the girl and the child and beat a quick escape. It was only once Choji was gone that Shikamaru began to think about how he'd get out of this. He had to time everything carefully. Gritting his teeth, he reached into his pocket and grabbed a kunai and an explosive tag. Wrapping the tag, he dropped his jutsu and, as the beast whirled around to charge at him, he threw the kunai, detonating the tag as soon as it stuck into the mask. In the smoke cover of the explosion, Shikamaru jumped from the building, landing with a roll onto the next building. He panted, feeling as though he'd just escaped by the skin of his teeth. And he sure had. He lurched back, his eyes going wide as the hollow landed right behind him, and he froze in place. Its mask was cracking away and there was a face. Shikamaru felt sick. What were these things? His thought immediately went out the window as a fist wrapped around his torso. The hollow's mouth stretched open as it hauled him into the air, and his eyes widened as three more landed around it, reaching hands to try and grab at him. He tried to wiggle his fingers to pull out the explosive tags that were in his satchel, but everything was moving too fast. Then, he heard it. Hitsuga Tensho. And saw a white slash of energy carve through the group of hollow that had almost gotten to him, narrowly missing him. Shikamaru fell onto his back when the hollow holding him disintegrated, gulping as he took a few moments to calm himself down. He took a deep breath and looked to the sky, seeing a tall figure with orange hair, dressed in the very same garbs that Hitsugaya favored. Who the hell was that? Somehow, there was no damn end to these things. Every time Hitsugaya cleared one batch, another Garganta would open and another batch would take its place. It was starting to get downright annoying as hell, especially since his Kage Bunshins were shaky at best due to only recently having regained his chakra. Still, he was keeping the situation under control. Through some of his clone's memories, he realized he had completely blown his cover of obscurity and was now recognized for who he'd been, which was not ideal to say the least. Still, he had other things to focus on right now, and that was securing the village. Boy, Toshiro. That better be the real you and not these weird clone things. Hitsugaya twitched. It's Hitsugaya Taichu. He snapped instinctively, only to pause for a moment as the battle fervor eased enough for him to realize exactly what had happened. Another 3 clones poofed away and he was hit with the memories of Ichigo's Hitsuga Tensho that had cut down a fresh wave of hollows that he was too distracted with his own fight to circumvent. Kurosaki. How I've been trying to reach Soul Society for a week, right? Ichigo pulled out a small badge from his shahakusho and sending a pulse of Ryoku into it. We've been looking for you, too. What the hell happened? You had everyone worried. Ichigo looked Hitsugaya over proper, then, and couldn't help the small snicker that slipped out. Why are you wearing pajamas? Hitsugaya raised both eyebrows. I'm touched, truly, by your concern, he deadpanned, but that is irrelevant. If you say anything about the pajamas, I will end you. He frowned then. Though I find it hard to believe that it's just you that came to find me. Well, yeah, of course it's not just me, Ichigo said, disappearing with a shunpo and reappearing to cleave a hollow in half. I'm just the test. Test? Hitsugaya asked, squinting. Ichigo looked at him as though he was crazy. Do you even know where you are, Toshiro? Hitsugaya scowled, slicing into another hollow. Hitsugaya Taichu. And yes, I do, actually. What I don't realize is why I couldn't get back. It was nice, actually, to have company that didn't look at him and see someone he no longer was. He'd never tell Ichigo that, of course. The Sinkamans didn't have this dimension keyed in, or something. Ichigo paused in his explanation as he stabbed one hollow and immediately swung his blade through it to Hitsuga Tensho another. Jetabashi's explanation didn't really make too much sense to me, and that creepy Kuritsuchi guy didn't help at all. You know. It's been 7 years or something, and I still don't like him. Hitsugaya sent out another ice dragon, landing on his feet neatly next to Ichigo as he took another appraisal of the battlefield. That did make him feel slightly better about his inability to properly connect with the afterlife. Anyways, Ichigo continued, lurching back as he caught an attempted attack against a blade. We needed to see that the Sinkaman was set up right, but we also didn't want to send someone through that wouldn't be prepared to handle themselves. So you volunteered like the impulsive idiot you have an unfortunate tendency to be, Hitsugaya finished, a slight twist of amusement rising to his lip. Ichigo's brow and lip both twitched in agitation, an annoyed grin on his face. Oi. He slashed a trio of hollow through. I just know that I'm more than strong enough to handle myself. Matsumoto's heading our mission to get you back. Oh, good. Exactly what I needed. Matsumoto coming here and meeting Lady Hokage. He shuddered. That was, actually, something he had been hoping to never have happen. Clearly, something was conspiring against him. Lady Hokage, Ichigo asked. Hitsugaya shook his head. I'll explain later. Look alive, Kurosaki, more are coming. Unfortunately for him, there was another interested party that took the distraction as an opportunity. Hitsugaya let out a choked sound as the QB's chakra surged forward and he lost his footing, falling down and landing with a thud on the roof below them, displacing some tiles as he slid down to the next roof below. The pain of the impact radiated up his body in a dull ache, but more painful was the forceful, burning edge of the cloak that struggled to take over him. His teeth sharpened, nails sharpened into claws, and his whiskers grew wild. Toshiro. Ichigo quickly descended, landing more neatly by the captain. He knelt down, eyes widening at the sight of the vicious red energy that started to clump up around Hitsugaya's form. Damn it, Hitsugaya snarled, moving a hand to his face, ignoring the accelerated return of clone memories in favor of trying to suppress the QB's influence. Damn it. Disappear. I won't let you. Taichu. Fuck. Hitsugaya looked up, wincing. Rukia, Renji, Matsumoto, Hinamori, Ikaku and Yumichika, was it? An interesting choice on Matsumoto's part. Wait. Urahara? He rasped out. Oh, don't mind me, Hitsugaya Taichu, I just came out of curiosity, Urahara said, waving his fan dismissively with a bright smile on his face. What an interesting place this is. Is this where you were born? Hitsugaya opened his mouth to say something, but was quickly interrupted. Naruto. Sakura called as she and teams 8, 9, and 10 landed with her. Are you okay? Who the hell are you guys? Ikaku drawled, drawing his blade. Back off. This doesn't concern humans. Considering that you're invaders in our village, Niji snapped in reply, prepared to attack, we should be asking that question first. All things considered, Hitsugaya thought the defensive posturing between the two groups was rather ridiculous, and he snarled as he saw the remains of the horde grow too close for comfort. Enough, Hitsugaya hissed. He glared over at the Shinigami reinforcements. Instead of antagonizing the living, would you care of the damn hollow? He had other problems to worry about. Indeed. Ikaku, Yumichika, Urahara said brightly, kneeling down, take care of the last of them, would you? Ikaku spared the group another glare before lowering his blade with a scoff, and Yumichika sighed. We'll help too, Rukia said as she grabbed Renji's arm. Renji looked to her sharply, but upon looking at Hitsugaya again he nodded. So the four leapt away to clean up the mess, and Urahara placed both hands on his knees. This must be the energy signature we've been picking up with your Riatsu signature, Urahara said, scrubbing his chin. It feels quite gloomy. Matsumoto ignored Urahara's contemplation, instead focused on how harrowed and tense Hitsugaya looked. What happened, Taichu? She asked gently. Especially to do this to you? Hitsugaya-kun, you look awful, Hinamori breathed, expression distressed as she kneeled and reached out in an attempt to comfort him. Hitsugaya hissed. Don't touch me, he snapped, and Hinamori flinched back, her eyes wide. The cloak is caustic. I'm fine. Curious. Urahara sang, smiling as he pulled his fan up and snapped it open, fluttering it in front of his face. And you all are very curious as well. Nice to meet you all. You must be the people he grew up with, right? Ichigo froze, blinking in surprise. Really? Yes, Sakura said first, looking more than a little confused at Urahara's eccentric nature. But who are you? Hitsugaya Taichu's associate. Urahara smiled wider as he looked to Hitsugaya. But that is unimportant. You remember your life, don't you, Hitsugaya Taichu? Yes. 5 years, now, Hitsugaya replied, sagging as the last of the cloak faded away, his eyes returning to their normal blue. He closed his eyes, taking a few moments to breathe. Damn it. This is becoming inconvenient. Matsumoto opened her mouth to say something, but Shikamaru spoke first. Hitsugaya, he said, and Hitsugaya looked over tiredly. He saw something haunted in Shikamaru's eyes, and frowned. Those hollow under their masks. Ichigo's face fell, and Matsumoto looked away. Hitsugaya sighed, knowing exactly what Shikamaru had experienced. Ah. You saw under the mask, didn't you? Shikamaru nodded. Were those things humans? They aren't human anymore, Ichigo said softly, looking almost haunted. There's no coming back from being a hollow. Our job, Matsumoto said, her expression serious, is to protect the living and the balance of life and death. This includes taking care of hollows. We purify them with our Zanpakuto, Hinamori continued from where she knelt, which allows them passage into Soul Society. I see you've been holding back information, Urahara said, giving Hitsugaya a rather reproachful look. Considering that I suspect you're going to be sticking around, you should really be forthwith with what you know, Hitsugaya Taichu. What? Matsumoto asked sharply, looking straight to Hitsugaya. Hitsugaya could only sigh, hanging his head. I will explain my reasons, but Urahara is correct. Until I resolve my business here, I will be staying. You're staying? Lee asked, his expression hopeful. Hitsugaya looked over to them with a huff as he climbed to his feet, dusting his pajamas off. Until I can effectively prevent any more attempts of Ito-tensei to bring me back here. Yes, I will be staying. Lee's eyes shone so brightly that Hitsugaya was leery about what was going to happen next. He managed to sidestep the first attempt at a hug, but Lee was not deterred and managed to grab him on the second try. Oi. Naruto-kun. We have you back, and you are staying. We all have so many things to catch up on. Ah, I don't mean to be rude and cut things short here, Urahara chirped, catching Lee's attention. Hitsugaya took the opportunity to pull himself away, dusting himself off with a grumble. But we do need to establish a point of contact with Sirite as per our orders. He looked to Hitsugaya, smiling as he fluttered his fan. Do you happen to have a place in mind for where we can do this? Hitsugaya groaned. His apartment was going to be cramped as hell. So what do you intend to do? Hitsugaya pinched the bridge of his nose with a deep sigh before lowering his hand, looking to Shikamaru with a deep frown. My priority at this moment is to debrief my subordinates and Urahara. Addressing the issue at hand, and he spared a glance above, where the four were cleaning up shop, is secondary. I will delegate the handling of the initial fallout to you. Inform those who are in the need-to-know basis that I will address them at a later time. Shikamaru pursed his lips before nodding. Understood. He looked back to his fellow shinobi, brow furrowing. We'll take care of any straggling civilians and the aftermath until that time. Good. Hitsugaya gave a firm nod. With that dismissal, for that was clearly what it was, the shinobi reluctantly dispersed. That taken care of and with no further interruptions seemingly to be had, he turned back to the group of Shinigami. Are you all the forces that were deployed? Kira and Hisagi were dispatched to secure the perimeter and then to establish the communication relay. Were there to be complications that prevented your return, which we assumed there likely would be? Urahara waved his fan towards Hitsugaya with a vague smile. After that, the quantity of deployed forces was to be evaluated by the one who knows this place best. By me, you mean? Urahara gave him another bright smile. Exactly. As I had mentioned earlier, I only intended to visit and take a peek of my own. Curiosity, you see. He fluttered the fan once again. Kuritsuchi is very interested in this place himself. I would give you a warning, but I believe you're already aware. Hitsugaya's brow twitched. Yes. I'm aware. Urahara clapped his hands together. Fantastic. Well, with that all established, I believe you already know where you want us to touch base. Without wasting any further time, Hitsugaya disappeared with a shunpo. Expectant of this, the rest followed, though Ichigo didn't hesitate to voice a complaint before he did so. From a distance, Kakashi kept watch, before letting out a deep sigh and moving on. Arriving at Hitsugaya's old apartment from their initial entry point was thankfully trivial. When they entered through the front door, Ichigo's eyebrows rose. The room was already feeling cramped with a group of them, and there was only one chair at the table. This place is small, he said, sitting on one of the counters in the tiny kitchen. Renji scoffed quietly, lip curling a bit as he leaned up against a wall, arms folded tightly to his chest. And run down to hell, too. Michiko looked disdainful as he sniffed indignantly. Surely we're not staying here, are we, Hitsugaya Taichu? Thank you for your kind comments, Kurosaki, Abarai. And yes, Asagawa, we are staying here unless you have a better idea. This was my apartment when I was alive and has been returned to my possession since my return, Hitsugaya said dryly. The Shinigami stared, clearly at a loss as they processed his words. Hitsugaya didn't seem bothered as he moved over to the fridge. After acquiring several ingredients from his refreshed stores, he went back to the stove, pulling out a pan from a cabinet. He began to cook, quiet. The sound of chopping echoed in the cramped quarters. You lived here? Rukia asked softly, her eyes widening as she stared after the captain's back. Hitsugaya didn't bother to look up, putting the ingredients he'd prepared into the pan. In life, I was born here. I was an orphan. I truly did not want to extend my stay here, but with this most recent incident, it is clear that I have disrupted the environment in my lacking state. To leave now without addressing that issue would be nothing short of negligence of my duties as a captain. His lip curled as he took a diversion to pull out a rice cooker, setting it up to cook. I have also learned of the means by which I was displaced from the Sirte, and the risk of it being repeated should I elect to return is too great to take that chance. Oh ho? Urahara asked, fluttering his fan over his mouth. I will discuss it at length during the debrief, Hitsugaya said. I do not intend to repeat myself. Ichigo pushed himself off the counter before going over to the window, popping his head out to look at the village around them. So this is where you lived? This village? He asked. With a twitch of the brow, Hitsugaya lowered the heat, folding his arms as he turned back to the group that loitered around his home from life. Different from the living world. I am aware, Kurosaki. His eyes immediately shot over to the space that was now occupied by Hisagi and Kira. Report. Hitsugaya Taichu. Kira lowered his head. We observed minor hollow activity in the outskirts. They have been taken care of. Hisagi continued sternly. They weren't even Mino's class. That was something, at least. At the least it was easily taken care of. Hitsugaya closed his eyes before nodding once. Good. There was an instance, Kira continued with a frown, where some humans were attempting to intervene. I did not expect them to be capable of even seeing hollow, let alone utilizing combat the way they did. Such powers are almost similar to our own. Urahara smiled. It's likely a result of the atmosphere of this world and the way the people are born compared to that of the living world we know so well. His eyes narrowed slightly. Isn't that so, Hitsugaya? With a curt nod, Hitsugaya turned back to the stove, finishing the meal. Indeed. Humans here are born with the ability to manipulate living energy. Chakra. Some have more than others, and their combat capability is proportional to the amount. He turned to look at Hisagi and Kira. You were to establish the relay? Hisagi and Kira both nodded. We were, Hitsugaya Taichu, Hisagi said. The rice cooker beeped. With a sigh, Hitsugaya pulled the food off the stove. Eat first. Take care of that afterwards. Setting it down, getting out the rice and transferring it to a bowl, and then grabbing more bowls and chopsticks out, the captain then turned back to the stove, putting the kettle in place. Noting this as she moved forward, Matsumoto tilted her head to the side. Aichu? He looked over briefly, meeting her eyes with a single raised eyebrow. Aren't you eating? The simple answer was Hitsugaya pulling out a cup ramen from a cupboard and setting it down on the counter. Mystified by the choice, they could only watch as he boiled the water before adding it to the cup. In any case, the simple enough answer as to why I did not return was that I was rendered incapable of doing so. Those words weren't expected. Renji rose his head from the bowl. Incapable. Ryoryoku and chakra do not mix without consequences. Hitsugaya offered little else in the way of explanation. Those people. Shikamaru took pause. The chaos from earlier had now mostly been resolved, people evacuated to appropriate areas and relief in progress. There was cleanup of the devastated portions of the city underway and everything was mostly falling into a lull. So he turned to see Ino, fiddling with the edge of her shirt. She looked back up to him. They wore the same clothes as him. She frowned. So they were all dead too, weren't they? Tenten frowned. The one with the fan didn't have the same clothes as them. Yes, Shino said quietly, but he did know Hitsugaya. So the likelihood is he was probably dead too, Niji concluded, closing his eyes. Tiba folded his arms, brow furrowed. So we're really going to forget about the fact that he's Naruto? Eyes fell on him. You know what I mean. We're just going to call him Hitsugaya, as if he wasn't the same person we've known all our lives. Going to let him be buried in the stoic Sasuke-like person he's become. We're doing that. Akamaru whined slightly, pawing at his nose as he laid down flat on the ground. Toji looked at Kiba, pulling out the bag of chips. That's not it. It's as he said, Hinata said softly, as Kiba turned to face her, it's commanding respect and giving respect in return. We should respect his choices. In that moment, I forgot to respect his choices. I was simply taken by the fact that he was going to continue staying. Lee threw his arm over his face, his other fist clenched tightly in the air as tears streamed down his face. I must apologize to him the next time I see him. Well, Shikamaru said quietly, you're apparently getting that chance. What I don't yet understand is why that so suddenly changed. Sakura turned to Shikamaru, now. Huh? Niji nodded slowly. He's right. Hitsugaya has been so intent on leaving the moment he could, and yet now his decision on the matter has been sharply reversed. Something changed. Shikamaru paused. How troublesome. He already told us part of the reason why. He's changed the atmosphere. He rubbed at his temples with a sigh. With how he has asserted that it is part of his duty to protect the balance between the living and the dead, these hollow are probably involved in this balance. Since they've never shown up before now, it means. He looked to Niji, whose eyes also widened in realization. That he has business to complete here. Exactly. Hitsugaya watched as the other Shinigami took care of cleaning up after themselves. Urahara adjusted his sleeves, looking around the room appraisingly. I assume you have a larger room in this apartment? He asked lightly. Yes, Hitsugaya said. Likely the only place it will fit. He turned without further comment towards the bedroom door, leading the way for the rest of the group. Yumichika's nose wrinkled as he got a look at the rest of the place, arms folded. Ah, Hitsugaya Taichu, this place needs some serious touch-ups. Do that, the captain let out a scoff. I do not plan to stay long enough for a touch-up of this place to matter. The sooner these issues are resolved, the better. It is a temporary lodging and nothing more. He held out a hand to one of the walls. Move the chest of drawers to clear enough room to set it up. Understood, Kira and Hisagi both said, moving forward to get it done. Hinamori, who had been silently contemplating this time, clasped her hands together tighter as she took everything in. Her eyes moved to the frames that sat face down until she found the single frame that still stood. She let out a soft breath, feeling a weight grow in her chest. She recognized those eyes. Hitsugaya-kun? She asked, softly. Hitsugaya paused and looked over, seeing where her gaze went. His eyes went cold and he went over to the photo, taking it into his hands for a moment. She caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass, a hint of pain tinged his expression, but no one else could see it, for he had his back to them. Was that? Matsumoto turned to the two of them, trying to get a glimpse of the photo, but Hitsugaya did not give her the chance. The memory, he said, placing the photo down, laid flat, of the person who died. That's all. Your memory, Hitsugaya-kun. Just because you're here now after so long, doesn't make it any less you. She argued, fists clenching at her sits. Inamori, he said, his inflection painfully monotone. He turned to look at her, his gaze as hollow as his voice. I will not discuss it further. I am not going to go on a monologue about every intricacy of the past I have in this place. It is the past. Hold on, Ichigo said, moving forward to grab the frame. Hitsugaya, who hadn't been anticipating the move and frankly should have, tried to move the frame away before he could manage it and swore when he failed that, looking sincerely annoyed. Ichigo looked the frame over and blinked. Huh. You were blonde. Hitsugaya's brow twitched as he closed his eyes. My Ryoryoku seemed to influence how I presented upon death. Perhaps that was part of the reason why the Shinigami of this world sent me to Soul Society instead of where I should have rightfully gone. And you still have those. Ichigo trailed off before looking back at Hitsugaya. Why do you have those marks on your face? Hitsugaya moved a hand to his cheeks, brow furrowing. Renji grimaced as he rubbed at his neck. I kinda wanted to ask the same question, but I didn't want to be fucking rude about it, Ichigo. Boy. It's a valid question, Renji. Ichigo barked back, brow twitching. Hands now moving to his temples as he rubbed at them, as if it would take away the sheer amount of stress he was under in that moment, Hitsugaya groaned. As much as I'm influencing the environment is influencing me. I would have much rather avoided this altogether, but it can't be helped. He shook his head. Still, I would rather not discuss this until a point where I do not have to explain myself twice. He gave a stink eye to the both of them. They immediately looked away. Taking the opportunity as it was, Matsumoto plucked the frame from Ichigo's hands before Hitsugaya could, and Hitsugaya hissed. Matsumoto, he warned, eyes narrowed to slits. Oh. Taichu. You were grumpy even back then. She looked absolutely elated to be given this material. Hitsugaya wanted to freeze her where she stood. But honestly, Hitsugaya Taichu, what is with that garish outfit? I see your fashion sense improved with death, Yumichika said with an indignant sniff. The Kaku peeked over Matsumoto's other shoulder. Man, who are these other people? I mean, the pink-haired chick, she was in that group, wasn't she? Irrelevant to the mission at hand, was the frigid reply. He moved to be seated back on the bed, pulling Orochimaru across his lap. If I must explain, it will be done when the time comes. However. For the time being, until the relay is set up, I will be meditating. He would need the mental fortitude in order to deal with the heavy conversation ahead. When Hitsugaya opened his eyes, it was to the sowers. Anger simmered in his gut, but he quickly quashed it down. There was no point to letting his emotions get the better of him. It would set him back in the long run. Meddlesome fox, he hissed out nonetheless, before beginning the trek to the cage. He hated the sloshing feeling between his sandals. Once he entered the room, he looked up to see the Bijuu glaring down at him, his eyes glowing bright with unrestrained malice. To what do I owe this visit, QB? He asked, looking around the vast room. Do you think I wanted you here? The fox grumbled, his annoyance seeming to permeate through the room. If only to shred you to pieces would I want you here, brat. Hitsugaya's brow twitched. Shut up, he growled, the water around his feet freezing in ragged spikes. The QB's eyes arched with glee, a broad grin crossing his face. Your temper has been rising more than usual since we've returned to this place, the QB taunted, grinning broadly. You're angry at being back here. I don't need you meddling, Hitsugaya growled in response, clenching his hands into fists. Since I'm finally here for long enough, for some annoying reason, I'll talk and you listen. You're attempting to gain a foothold once again and interfering with my abilities. So stop it, or I'll ensure that should I die for good, you come with me. The water crashed into his eyes as the beast shifted, expression transitioning from amusement to rage. Insolent, the beast snarled, how dare you speak to me that way, human. It has nothing to do with me. You cannot control my aura after the century you spent slacking off. Nothing more, nothing less. How annoying. Hitsugaya's eyes narrowed. Insulting my capabilities will get you nowhere, QB, he replied. I speak nothing, the demon said, closing his eyes, but the truth. You have not needed to suppress my power for so long that it's taken its toll, and you've lost control. Now that you're back here, where my chakra is naturally stronger, you can't suppress it anymore. Echoes? Wait. Echoes? Hitsugaya turned his head, looking around, he could hear a vague voice echoing in his ears as he tensed, looking for the source. The room bubbled to life with the QB's chakra, the water around him going bright red and bubbling hot, melting the ice he'd formed. He let out a yell as the water surged, enclosing him within it. See the proof for yourself. His eyes shot open in shock, and he stared into the concerned faces of all the Shinigami around him. Hitsugaya-kun, Hinamori gasped, your eyes. Not just the eyes, what is that energy? Rukia immediately cut in, bewildered. It happened before, but. Ignoring the burning of his muscles and the ache in his head, Hitsugaya looked down at his hands, seeing them clawed and red-tinged. He swore, grabbing his head. He exerted his own Ryatsu, causing the room to grow colder. He shook his head, scrabbling at his hair with his claws. Go away, damn it, he hissed, squeezing his eyes shut. Disappear. Disappear. The bubbling cloak slowly dissipated in chunks, fading into the air, and his dull red eyes faded to exhausted blue as he opened them once again. His whisker marks thinned, again, and he groaned, scrubbing his face. At that moment, Hisagi and Kira returned from the corner of the room, and Hitsugaya looked up, blearily, to see the screen in place. Hitsugaya Taichu, are you alright? Kira asked, softly. Do you need? No, Hira asked, I need nothing. I need you all to stop crowding me. He wobbled a bit and stood, walking to the screen. Is it done? The answer came before anyone could properly answer as a representative to the 12th Division appeared on the screen. They immediately startled, clutching their files tightly. Oh, Hitsugaya Toshiro. Transfer me. The frigid tone had the representatives startle worse, and they immediately did so. Upon seeing the rest of the captains in the screen, Hitsugaya took a knee in a bow. Satachu. Iraku smiled at him, even as the rest of the captains took the time to take him in. Ah, there you are, Hitsugaya Toshiro. You're looking well rested, at least. Hitsugaya belatedly realized, at that very moment, that he was still in pajamas. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, bye bye.